Basement level vibes with another one, straight up blackness aye. Who tell the truth? Mark Benskop, defend the ghetto youth. Mark Benskop, radio station is the fruit. Mark Benskop, straight up from the root. Mark Benskop, who tell the truth? Mark Benskop, defend the ghetto youth. Mark Benskop, radio station is the fruit. Mark Benskop, straight up from the root. Mark Benskop, I do it for the love, him not do it for no money. Straight up, him attack, educating everybody. Big up my friends and big up my family. Turn on the radio, catch the vibes, it's integrity. Straight up, Benskop stands for unity. One people, one nation, one destiny. Free up the truth in the air, even the blind can see. The deaf can hear, the dumb can talk, the cripple can walk. Boom. Who tell the truth? Mark Benskop, defend the ghetto youth. Mark Benskop, radio station is the fruit. Mark Benskop, straight up from the root. Mark Benskop, who tell the truth? Mark Benskop, defend the ghetto youth. Mark Benskop, radio station is the fruit. Mark Benskop, straight up from the root. Mark Benskop, we have to gather wrong, grab a seat and sit down, pay attention. Education, liberation, we have to stand strong. Benskop upon the radio, lively up the program. Everybody call somebody and let them turn and tune and on the radio and catch the boom song. We boom it up already, we have to boom it up again. Expose and reveal him. Who tell the truth? Mark Benskop, defend the ghetto youth. Mark Benskop, radio station is the fruit. Mark Benskop, straight up from the root. Mark Benskop, who tell the truth? Mark Benskop, defend the ghetto youth. Mark Benskop, radio station is the fruit. Mark Benskop, straight up from the root. Mark Benskop, I do it for the love, him not do it for no money. Straight up, him attack, educating everybody. Big up my friends and big up my family. Turn on the radio, catch the vibes, it's integrity.
Hello, this is attorney Shellen Washington, owner and founder of the Washington Law Firm, located at 455 Utica Avenue in Brooklyn, New York. We're specialized in medical malpractice, personal injuries, matrimonial law, and landlord and tenant. If you're in need of legal representation, please give us a call today. The number to call is 718-877-3100. Consultation is free at no cost to you. So call us today to see if we can be of any assistance to your legal needs. Again, the phone number to call us is 718-877-3100.
Basement level vibes with another one, straight up blackness aye. Who tell the truth? Mark Benskop, defend the ghetto youth. Mark Benskop, radio station is the fruit. Mark Benskop, straight up from the root. Mark Benskop, who tell the truth? Mark Benskop, defend the ghetto youth. Mark Benskop, radio station is the fruit. Mark Benskop, straight up from the root. Mark Benskop, I do it for the love, him not do it for no money. Straight up, him attack, educating everybody. Big up my friends and big up my family. Turn on the radio, catch the vibes, it's integrity. Straight up, Benskop stands for unity. One people, one nation, one destiny. Free up the truth in the air, even the blind can see. The deaf can hear, the dumb can talk, the cripple can walk. Boom. Who tell the truth? Mark Benskop, defend the ghetto youth. Mark Benskop, radio station is the fruit. Mark Ben.
All right. Hey, good evening. It's 6 minutes after 9 o'clock in Guyana, Eastern Standard Time. Wherever else in this world you are, I'm sure it's a different time zone. The folks out in the UK, good. It's still, what is it, 5 hours ahead? So, yeah, it's in the morning there. Good morning to you guys in the UK. Good evening to you guys out in Atlanta, Georgia. You see here, Fulton County Sheriff's Office released new mugshots of four Trump co-defendants: Kenneth Chesebro, Kathy Latham, David Schaefer, and Ray Smith. All three of them, they're mugshots. This is getting interesting. 18 of them. I just wish, though, that these things can be done in Guyana. Guyana has lots and lots of corrupt officials. In Guyana, electoral fraud. In Guyana, not the trumped up charges that they brought against individuals to cover up the rigging of an elections. I'm not talking about trumped up charges against these three folks. And for over 3 years now, their cases are lingering in the courts. Each time the case is called up, the prosecutor or the persecutors are not ready. If I were a magistrate, I'm not. I'm not even a lawyer. And I want you guys to see my face when I say that. I'm not a magistrate. And I'm not even a lawyer, at least not yet. But were I a magistrate overseeing frivolous cases such as this one, I would have thrown it out. No corrupt government, no corrupt regime can ever get me to do their biddings. And these magistrates and judges who are afraid to make decisions because they feel that their professional future will be in jeopardy, it shows an act of selfishness that people are being persecuted. People are being persecuted from an oppressive or by an oppressive regime, and we have magistrates and judges who are not doing their job. Most of them, not all, mind you. And I'm not going to sit here to paint a brush or paint all of them with the same brush. I wouldn't do that. But it's unfair that individuals who should be brought before the court for electoral fraud are the very set of people who have been installed into office. We all know what happened. We all know what transpired on this day at GCOM's headquarters. We all know what they wanted to do with the chairman of the Guyana Elections Commission, Claudette Singh, who wanted to do the right thing. But for some reason or the other, she just went the other way. As they say in Guyana, she went south. Of course, her life was threatened. And she did say that a quote-unquote businessman, and that businessman is Shell Mohammed. She did say that Shell Mohammed wanted her dead. That's it. They wanted to kill her. She said that. But we'll get into that some other time, right? It's 10 minutes after 9 o'clock. My name is Mark Benshop. Thank you all for sharing the link. We are going to rock and roll. In fact, tonight we're dealing strictly with legal matters. The criminal justice system in the U.S. and the criminal justice system in Guyana. We have two attorneys tonight. I know you guys know one, but I bet you guys can't say who's the other one. Let's go. You know, I'd love to involve you guys. Tell me who are the two attorneys. You darn well don't know the other one. At least when you see him, some of you, oops, I already give away. It's a him, right? So we want to talk about the justice system and how much of an injustice it is, specifically, with what is happening in Guyana. Matthew Dennison, you're out. No, it's not. Let me see. You guys wouldn't be able. No, not Darren Wade. Sorry. Shondell Griffith, you're out. Lights out, as we would say. Good evening again to all of you. Thank you so much for sharing the link. And now, before we get to our guests, what is happening here? What's happening here? Russian warlord killed in plane crash. Well, we don't know whether that's accurate or not. All we're hearing is that a name that resembles his, identical to his, was on the manifesto. I think 10 of them are so forth. Brenda Braithwaite, you're out. Not Mr. Ford. Sandra Price, you're out. Shock mayors. Something is going on here. Somebody is cheating. Somebody is cheating. Someone is cheating. Mr. Clearman Chung, attorney at law, Clearman Chung. Somebody is cheating. Shock mayors, good evening. Good evening to you. Somebody is cheating. But let's get back. Russian warlord killed. Look, I don't know what's happening. I just don't know what's happening. But that's the news. That's been trending. He's been killed. And if in fact it is this guy who was on that plane, why should anybody be surprised? Right? Simple as that. Why should anybody be surprised? In fact, it crossed my mind when we saw the news that he was in Africa. And he said that the Russians will go all across the continent. All of the continents. And then he said that they will possibly head back into Ukraine. And it was a bit ticklish what he said there, kind of like a huge shade. A huge shade. Robin Kendall, no. Brenda Braithwaite, no. No. Robin Kendall, no. Okay, good. So he threw a huge shade at Putin. And hours later, boom. If in fact, it was him on that jet, on that helicopter, well, you live by the sword, you die by the sword. That's it. What else is there to say? Okay, so what else is happening? Let's go to Rose Hall. Look what's happening at Rose Hall. Mother, son found dead at Rose Hall with wounds. What's happening in Guyana? Every single day, murders upon murders upon murders, alleged suicides, you name it. All these things are happening in Guyana. I don't know. People will say, you got to pray for Guyana. You got to do this. I don't know what is happening other than the fact that when you have evil regime, and some people might smile at me and say, hey, Mark, you're getting a little here, right? Well, hallelujah. But when you have a regime that is evil as this corrupt, racist PPP regime, all these things happen. People become frustrated. People feel they can do anything, any single thing. And some of them do brutal and cruel things, get away with it, all because they are either friends of Irfan Ali, friends of the acting commissioner of police. They are friends with some other corrupt individuals in the Guyana police force. That is how the country is running right now. It is a lawless country. How many of you would agree with me that Guyana under this corrupt PPP regime is a lawless regime? Again, good evening to all of you. And our sympathies go out to Melissa Arokiam and her son, Anthony Arokiam, 8 years old, chopped to death. I don't know, every single day. We'll be joined shortly by Sean Washington, attorney at law, no stranger to you guys, and attorney at law, Claremont M. Chung. Claremont M. Chung. Right off the bat, as soon as he gets on here, I will start off with my little Chinese. Ni hao ma. I'm going to test him here when he gets on. I am going to test him here. Oh, he's already here. Thank you, operator. Mr. Claremont Chung, attorney at law. Good evening, sir.
Hi, Ben. Dave. Mark, sorry. It's good to be here. Having me. I hope I fulfill some of the responsibilities that you require of me.
Thank you so much. Appreciate your time. Ms. Shalon Washington, no stranger to our audience at all. Good evening, ma'am. How are you?
Good evening, Mark, and good evening to Clement Chung. Good evening to all the listeners out there tonight. It's a pleasure to be here as usual.
as we say in Guyana and maybe other parts of the world, I have noticed that our listeners are fired up. They're ready to rock and roll this evening. They want to hear about the justice system. They want to hear about so many different things. But you guys are the attorneys. I put my hands up. I'm not an attorney. Please, guys, you guys already have me done as an attorney. I am not an attorney. I don't want anybody to say that. You can speak that into existence, but I'm not an attorney. These are the two attorneys. They're the competent ones this evening. But before we get straight to Mr. Clement Chung, his first appearance here, hopefully it's not going to be his last, I want to touch on this quickly. National Intelligence Building to be renamed in honor of luncheon. That is what Irfan Ali has said. Come on, guys. Those of you in the audience, I have my opinion on this. So quickly, Mayor, luncheon wasn't even buried as yet, but yet they want to rename the National Intelligence Building in honor of Roger Luncheon. These people go to bed, they wake up, and anything that passed through their mind, that's it. Hey, we're going to do this today. Hey, we're going to do that today. There's nothing that's being done in an orderly manner. These are things that should be debated in Parliament, and then you're able to say, well, this is the way forward. What are the reasons put forward for wanting to rename? Wanting to rename the intelligence building, the PPP spy building, in honor of luncheon? I just don't get it. I don't get it. I see Miss Washington is smiling. Take the first shot at that, even though I wanted to go to Mr. Clement Mingo. Not Mingo, sorry. My apologies. Take a first shot at that, Miss Washington, please.
I think we've seen this several times. The Guyana government makes unilateral decisions for the people of Guyana. The people of Guyana has no saying in what happens in their own backyard. So for the government to decide unilaterally without consulting with Parliament or even getting a census to figure out what is the opinion on the population as to renaming the building, they've gone ahead and make that decision because the government of Guyana believe Guyana belongs to them and not the people of Guyana. Therefore, they make decisions unilaterally to the exclusion of the people of Guyana. They do not know whether or not Guyanese are in agreement or disagreement with this decision, but they just thought, okay, we're going to rename the building in memory of the late Roger Luncheon. And I admire their eagerness to do something admirable. But again, they must take into account whatever the population want, the desires of the Guyanese people, whatever the masses want, that's what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to go in accordance with the wishes of the people. This is not a PPP country. This is not PPP owned Guyana. It's the Guyanese people own Guyana, and they should have a say in anything the Guyana government wish to do.
Well said, Miss Washington. If you're now joining us, we have with us this evening Ms. Shellon Washington, no stranger to you guys. And also we're joined by attorney at law, Clement M. Chung, a Guyanese, of course. Good evening, sir, again, and welcome to Straight Up. This is your first appearance on 107.1 FM. We want you to give us a quick background as to Clement Chung, this little boy from Guyana. We're about in Guyana and so forth.
Well, I'm hardly a little boy, but...
Oh, no. I didn't mean a little boy now. I meant a little boy growing up in Guyana. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was born in Castle Housing Scheme, which is just past the Lower Pentair Cemetery. It's one of the early schemes that were built in the early 50s. And basically went to primary school in the area. Also went to St. Stephen's primary school. Went to Queens College, and after that made my way to the U.S. And college here was Columbia University in New York. Law school was Rutgers. And you mentioned earlier that you were not a lawyer, and that we were, but it's just a matter of an exam. And I found many lawyers inside prison, outside prison, some waiting to get in that are better than I and know more about their cases than I do. And some have instructed me on how to proceed, even without law degrees. So yes, being a lawyer means that you spent a certain amount of time in school, and beyond that, there's no intellectual challenge really beyond the average person.
Thank you. And you kind of like hit home at me there when you said there are some lawyers in prison as well, because, you know, they get some prison lawyers. I've had that experience myself where I have had to do some legal matters while I was at the Camp Street prison there doing my time. But let me apologize. In the beginning, it wasn't that I was describing you as a little boy. I wouldn't do that to you nor any of our guests. It's just that the little boy that was growing up in Guyana. Thank you.
No, I don't mind. I don't mind going back to those days. In many ways, I still am. And, I think that adults in general, and this is philosophical, away from the subject, that to the extent that they can remain children, that to that extent is their joy.
Absolutely. So how long have you been practicing law, and what aspect of law do you practice here in the U.S.?
Well, I was admitted in Jersey in 1995. So what's that? About 20-something years.
29 years. Yeah.
29. And in New York in 1996, which a year less. I started out mainly in criminal. I worked as a contract attorney for the public defender's office in Jersey, and did some defense work in New York. And then I bounced around trying to get an understanding of what was going on in the larger scheme of things. I don't do as much criminal today as I did then, but I still dabble. Today I appeared in a matter, criminal matter, so I didn't feel in any way out of place. I felt like I'm still in the game. And so now I do a lot of estate work as well for elderly and, people trying to prepare for their the time when they're no longer here.
I got you. 23 minutes after 9 o'clock, Claiborne Chung is here with us, attorney at law, also attorney at law, Ms. Shellon Washington. Ms. Washington, let's get straight over to Guyana, because I want to get back to Mr. Chung concerning the works of the district attorney or here in the U.S. and compare that to the DPP in Guyana. But before we get back to Mr. Chung on that, let's deal with this here, the Commission of Inquiry into the Madja dorm fire. What is your take? I know that we have dealt with this on numerous occasions right here on 107.1 FM. What is your take on the Commission of Inquiry? And we're hearing here, as it appears in the Village Voice, that commissioners to visit Region 8 today. What are they visiting? And they claim to that this is going to be seamless, impartial. Your take, ma'am.
The description, seamless and impartial, I think those words should never be used when it comes to anything under this regime. I've seen the commission that they have selected. 3 persons are there. And my take is those people were selected because, let's be real, they were selected because of their political affiliation. There's no other reason. And to use the word impartial, I think it would be an insult to the families who suffered such tremendous loss. I don't think there's any discussion of impartiality that will be taking place, because to do a thorough investigation would mean to expose people, who may be considered PPP or people under the PPP regime. And if the government of Guyana wanted to select a commission with impartial individuals, it should have been a mixture. Probably just one PPP person, and the rest should have been from the general public. Afro-Guyanese, probably from APNU or some other party. But the way the commission was selected, there's no discussion of impartiality. And then the other thing is the profession of the persons who were selected, whether or not they're capable of disposing of or handling their functions as on the commission to investigate and properly determine what was the cause of the fire, and then what are the incidents surrounding the actual fire itself. I'm not sure that they're properly equipped in terms of their qualification for the task which the Guyana government has entrusted on them. I think the Guyana government usually just select people not necessarily based on the fact that they're qualified for the job, but they just probably select them based on their affiliation to the government, or based on their affiliation to somebody, a friend, a family, whoever is sitting in the PPP government. But, I think one of the most important thing the families of the victims should continuously push for is that an independent commission of inquiry is appointed, not with these people that they selected there, because none of them are properly qualified to do the type of investigation that is required. You'd at least need somebody who is experienced in fire science. None of them has a degree in fire science. I know at least one of the persons who is an attorney, and then there's the two other, and none of them are properly equipped or qualified in forensic science or fire forensics to do a proper investigation, or maybe to hire the right people under them to do the proper investigation to determine and give the families some sort of closure to this very tragic incident that occurred in Guyana. But this is the nature of business in Guyana. They are not thorough. They don't do things in any proper fashion. It's just we just select somebody, whether or not they're qualifying. We just push them there to do whatever type of job, open and close book investigation, and that's the end of this. There's not going to be much, and the families are never going to get a proper answers to their questions as to what and when and why and causes. They're never going to get that from this commission that was appointed under the PPP. That's never going to happen.
Never going to happen. We have seen other commissions of inquiries under the PPP regime that they've basically been a waste of time, a waste of taxpayers' monies, and so forth. I want to bring our criminal lawyer in to get his take on this little girl. I believe she is either 14 or 15 years old in Guyana, even without a proper investigation conducted. And the investigators themselves said that they are not completed. The investigation is not completed, but yet they rushed to charge through the DPP this little girl with 20 counts of murders. Your take on this, Mr. Clement Chung?
Right. I could probably begin that by referring to the earlier question about Mr. Lunchan's the suggestion that he be named, that the building be named after him. And part of the righteousness of these kinds of decisions is rooted in the Constitution because of how Parliament is divided. And the way Parliament is divided, once you have that majority, whether it's one or any more than one, you're essentially out of the decision process. So until that's corrected, we're going to have all these. And even when that's corrected, we may still have it because it becomes a practice, a sort of cultural approach to power. That aside, children, our most valuable assets, some of our most valuable assets, are supposed to be treated with a certain kind of care and a rush. And because they don't have the same kinds of decision-making processes as adults do, their brains are not entirely fully developed, and therefore certain kinds of these decisions we don't credit them with. There's a reason why children can't be charged with certain crimes here in the U.S., or if they are charged, in fact, they'll charge as adults because that recognition that they don't have the mental development. And so in this particular case, though I'm not familiar with all that had happened, I know that there was a fire and that she allegedly gave an admission that she may have lit the match that ignited her. I think it was her mattress, which then caused the entire conflagration. And I think to charge her without getting her the right kinds of care that she would need in mental health, perhaps look at some of the things surrounding the resources she had available to her. And it sort of shifts the responsibility away from adult actors onto the child and away from perhaps the true perpetrators of this crime. It may not be the person that lit the match, but the person that created the conditions where a single match can lead to the deaths of 20 other children. So oftentimes these are just ways of shifting blame rather than dealing with the real issue, which is the conditions that adults created.
I want to get back to another question concerning the St. Madia dorm fire and the fact that there is an ongoing criminal investigations, but yet the regime has decided that they want a commission of inquiry. Your take on what's happening? Why the commission of inquiry alongside a criminal investigation?
And the commission of inquiry, unfortunately, is often just that very thing, an attempt to shift the blame, to diversify the attention, to obscure truth, really, and then to come up with a solution or come up with a ruling that appears to have been well thought out by choosing, persons who they feel are respected in the community. So commissions in general have to be looked at with a kind of scrutiny that the institutions that were designed to deal with these kinds of issues, the commissions need a higher level of scrutiny than the courts, because here it is, as I think Shalom was pointing out, people who have no known professional background in investigations are charged with coming up with a solution and a ruling over something they know very little about, or certainly they don't know that much more than ordinary people. So yeah, commissions in this case is probably just, it's left to be seen. They may make good decisions, but generally speaking, my experience with commissions is an attempt to obscure.
Thank you so much, Mr. Claremont Chung, attorney at law, criminal attorney at law out in the USA. Getting back to this here, Ms. Washington, just in the event that I may have missed your comment on why exactly are they going on the ground? There's really nothing there. But what are they going on the ground? What do they expect to, what sort of evidence or information they are seeking on the ground, other than, in my opinion, wasting time? But your take.
Claremont said something that is really profound there. When the commission goes out there, it's kind of like a blame shifting. So rather than focusing on the conditions that, or who created the conditions to cause such a tragic accident, they're going to focus on the one person who, is alleged to have, ignite the matches and cause the flames. But really, I have said it on this show before, that the real person that should be focused on is maybe the derm mother or somebody else who did, in fact, lock those children in that building with grilled windows, grilled doors, no keys for any way to escape in the event of an emergency. They had no emergency evacuation plan. There was nothing to save them from this tragedy. So, I'm in agreement that really this commission, and we know very well that's not what the commission is going to do. The commission is going to focus their attention on the person who lit the match. And that we know for sure. The Guyanese people, or the people that they've placed on the commission, a lot of times are very narrow-minded, because their vision is it's limited to the level of their intelligence or their knowledge. And the people that they have appointed have zero experience in this sort of thing. So I'm still waiting to see what could they write a report to tell the victim's family or the people of Guyana that they don't already know, because their investigation is limited to their knowledge, to the extent of their knowledge. And to really do anything of any substance would definitely need to bring experts in and really get to the bottom of this. And like Claremont said, the real culprit here, or the real person who should be placed on trial, should be the person who's responsible for the conditions that resulted in the killing or the murder of all 20 of those young students.
Well said, Ms. Shalon Washington there. I want us to go back now to a commission of inquiry that was held into the 2020 general and regional elections. That commission of inquiry was a farce, a waste of taxpayers' monies, typical of the PPP. But this question is to Attorney Chung as it pertains to individuals who were charged over 3 years now, and not a single evidence presented to them against them in court. But each time they appear in court, the prosecutor says they're not ready yet with the case. But yet a commission of inquiry was conducted and completed in a short space of time. How much of an injustice, Mr. Chung, is this to these individuals who were, in my opinion, wrongfully charged?
Well, generally speaking, they said justice delayed is justice denied, and I think you said 3 years. That's a long time, and if I were representing them, I would have moved some time ago for a speedy trial or whatever the equivalent is, and failing that, and ask for dismissal, because many of the actors, the witnesses, whatever evidence they may have gathered is not getting hotter or stronger. It's weakening as time go by. So if up until now they haven't been able to really describe and charges properly and get to where they want to go, a verdict, after 3 years, I think seriously we should consider demanding a dismissal. Now, this is notwithstanding whatever the strength of the charges are. I don't know. I'm just talking about on constitutional grounds. You shouldn't have to put your life on hold for that long. That alone is sufficient reason to dismiss. There may be an indication that there are no charges that could be substantiated.
But even in this matter here, they had a commission of inquiry again. And in that farce of a commission of inquiry, they concluded that people attempted to rig the March 2020 elections.
Mm-hmm. Well, the commission standards are a little lower. I could imagine a commission could come up with just about anything, because the requirements are not the equivalent of beyond a reasonable doubt. It means, the preponderance of the evidence, what things look like. They could make conclusions and not be too wrong. Even if they are wrong, they could fall within a certain a window. But in a criminal proceeding, where people's actual liberty is at stake, a higher standard is required. And I guess that's the problem. They can't meet that higher standard, but they can meet the lowest standard of a commission. There's no punishment, I don't think, that the commission had the authority to mete out. So it's almost, as Shalom pointed out, maybe a waste of time. But it's in the record, and for the people whom that is important, it's part of history. And if the people who were named as having collaborated or conspired to steal or otherwise change the election, probably need to go to court themselves to revisit, if they feel that way, to revisit that decision and to hold that decision in some kind of contempt.
Well, again, I'm not 39 minutes after 9 o'clock.
Facts or any of that. I'm just as a legal principle I'm talking about.
Attorney Chung giving us his opinion on the matter. The justice delayed is justice denied, and they have so far presented no evidence against these three and other individuals who, in my opinion, and lots of you share that opinion out there listening to us, these folks were wrongfully charged and they're being persecuted by the PPP regime. Ms. Washington, I know you have dealt with this before too. Can you add some more what you think in terms of the delay in this matter here?
In terms of the delay, that just kind of brings me to the whole point as to where we stand on the rule of law in Guyana and how the rule of law is not equally enforced. It depends on the person that is being charged. And if you're not in cahoots with the PPP, this could be the results. You could be sitting waiting for a trial on a matter that has no substance, on a matter that shouldn't even get before the court to begin with. And that brings me to the DPP. The DPP has a code, Mark, that they use when they're determining who and how to prosecute a case. And that kind of troubles me when I see the amount of power that was placed in the hands of a single person, Shalimar Hack. It's very dangerous because now she can determine whether or not she should prosecute a person. And then if she decides to prosecute someone, she can have that case sitting for years without prosecuting. And unfortunately, like in the United States, where a defendant has a right to a speedy trial, they don't have such thing in Guyana. And even if they did, it's not readily enforceable as a legal constitutional right for the defendant. So Shalimar Hack has a lot of power. If people don't know, go look at the Guyana Prosecutors Code. That code, it's very, very dangerous, and it needs to be revisited. And the power that she has need to be stripped. Essentially, she has the power to be a judge and a jury, to convict you and to try you all in one. Because when a case goes to her, when a file goes to her, the first thing based on the code they have to do is determine whether or not there's a sufficient case, there's sufficient evidence that would lead to a likelihood of a conviction. Now, we know that whether or not a case evidence would rise to the level of beyond reasonable doubt to lead to a conviction, that's something that is vested in a judge or a magistrate. That's not an authority that should be vested in a prosecutor. But a prosecutor in Guyana has the ability to determine that based on the evidence presented to her. So it means that if she feels something is very serious, but she doesn't believe that the evidence is sufficient to secure a conviction, she could essentially let that person go. And then the other problem is, even if she determines that there's sufficient evidence, there's another part of that code that is really, really troubling, and all Guyanese need to be worried about that part. She has to determine whether or not it's within the public's interest to continue prosecution against that person. And we know that Dharamlal, apparently prosecuting him was not within the public interest. So there's going to be a lot of instances where she's going to make a determination based on the statute, based on the level of the person in political power, or if it's somebody affiliated with the PPP or somebody who sits in parliament. She could make a decision there and then that it's not within the public's interest to prosecute that person. And then there's the issue that she has to determine the person's culpability in the crime. Now, think about this. How is it even possible for a prosecutor to determine the level of a defendant's culpability just based on the evidence? That's something reserved for judge and jury or magistrate in Guyana. That's not her job. But yet, the Guyana government give her all these liberties. And therefore, this is why we have those three defendants still sitting there, because this woman carries a lot of power in Guyana to determine your life, what happens to you, how you're prosecuted, when you're prosecuted. Go read the code and you'll understand what I'm talking about. She has too much power and it needs to be stripped. That needs to change. That code for Guyana prosecutors needs to be rewritten correctly, and there needs to be a balancing of power.
Well said, Miss Washington. We saw not so long ago how she turned the hammer, so to speak, onto this guy, and instead of charging her friends them in the Guyana police force and even her so-called business friends them, she decided to drop the hammer on this guy. Police detective Sergeant Bascom, who actually was the whistleblower, exposed the manner in which they were handling a particular case, this case concerning the execution of Paper Shorts, where it's alleged that this guy, Azruddin Mohammed, who is standing there next to the acting commissioner of police, who has gotten his time extended even though he has passed the age of retirement. Oh, gosh, don't you guys just love Guyana? But let me go back to Attorney Chung on this question of the DPP. How would you compare the amount of powers that this DPP, the Director of Public Prosecution, has in Guyana compared to a district attorney? Mr. Chow.
Well, it does seem that it's a lot of power, at least in that early stage of an investigation. And, when the file goes to the DPP, depending on who you are, you tremble because you know what's coming. But if you're connected, it seems that it doesn't come as soon, or it comes watered down, or it doesn't come at all. But to leave that decision in the hand of one office is a little extreme. I think we have in the U.S. the equivalent of a grand jury that sits in advance of a trial to really decide whether there's sufficient cause to go forward. And though that is usually a very easy process, once a prosecutor or district attorney decides to go forward, enough cases have been no-billed, or the ordinary people make up the grand jury, like regular citizens have to appear, and the evidence is read out to them. And though it's a little one-sided a process, it's still, but the public is still allowed to participate. And there's no equivalent of that in Guyana. It's really in the hands of one person, and in this case, Ms. Hack. I mean, she's not the only one ever. There's been a history of this. So yeah, it is a little excessive for one person, and perhaps we do have to look at how that power could be curtailed and to get the people of Guyana more involvement. One of the complaints one of the cases I followed to some degree was the Boston case in Dartmouth. Not so much because of the slope of the DPP, but the methodology that was used to make the arrest and what turned out to be essentially a murder. And the methodology mimics the kinds of methodologies used here in terms of police work. Even the name of the squad was called SWAT. And they looked like a SWAT team dressed in black with masks and, heavy weaponry. So some of that cultural attitude is not like you can exist within 4,000 miles of the U.S. and not be influenced by its culture. We are. And notwithstanding, many of us are living here. We're trained here. We go back home and we bring a certain kind of attitude. What we need to be, and Ms. Hack need to be cognizant of, is that we don't approach that cultural exchange with the same kind of racial attitudes that we see here. There is no question that George Floyd was a global experience, and murdered by police, and or in Boston and Dartmouth could be seen in that very same light. It reminds me of another murder of Fred Hampton, which occurred in the 60s in Chicago, of a Black Panther leader who was gunned down in his home with his wife, pregnant. She was pregnant at the time, as was Mr. Boston's wife. A lot of these parallels seem to bring back a time of police brutality, police excesses. And the police excess happens because the higher echelon, including in this case, Department of Public Prosecutions, but the prosecutor's offices here, the police have a sense that they can do this and get away with it. And I think we have to be very careful about when things like that happen. I hope I've answered your question. I know that I could be a little extended.
No, that's okay. You have answered the question indeed. This brings me, before we head back to Miss Washington, allegations leveled against the guy who sits there as VP, a vice president in Guyana. Serious allegations of corruption leveled against him by an international news agency, Vice News. To this day, no criminal investigations at all, none whatsoever against him. But yet the frivolous minor charges against citizens are brought before them. They are charged. Some of them are sent to jail. But how much is it good for a country in terms of the laws of a country to hear that a senior government official is being accused of corruption and nothing is being done about it? Mr. Chia.
Well, this Jagdeo might not be a good subject for this discussion. One of the reasons is what has happened in the post jailbreak of 2002, which remains unaddressed up until now. And if we're going to have a commission of inquiry, maybe we should start with that. But commissions being what they are, the results would be like so many other commissions. But that period, as I said, has not been addressed properly. And when you don't address these issues, they tend to escalate and worsen. And the people who should be held responsible get a greater kind of feeling about their power, and they smelling themselves, so to speak, that they can do more, and they do whatever they wish, and make deals with other people's assets, and in this case, the people of Guyana. So again, these things, we were really, many of these officials, elected and otherwise, are operating on behalf of people outside of Guyana. And therefore they owe no allegiance, no responsibility, no ethical duty to the people of Guyana. That's how they operate. And in many cases, they're operating on behalf of European and American power and interests.
Well said.
So we shouldn't be surprised.
Clement Chung there, attorney at law. Ms. Washington, are you surprised? I know you've dealt with this on numerous occasions, that nothing at all, this matter has been swept under the rug.
Not surprising. We're dealing with Guyana, a country where we essentially have a dictatorship government. The rule of law, the rule of law, the rule of law, it has no relevance in Guyana. We have seen this so many times, that the way the law is enforced against the citizens of Guyana is so biased, it's so one-sided. And when it comes to the PPP government, they're untouchable. We've seen that in the Lawless case. We've seen that in this instance, where these allegations were meted out against Guyana VP Bar Jagdeo. Nothing was ever done. And we understand why, because if we have a police force that is controlled by the PPP, we have a DPP that is controlled by the PPP, then nothing could be done to touch these people. They're above the law. And if you're above the law, then the rule of law means nothing. That could be tossed aside easily. And, whenever the issue of corruption comes up, as it relates to anybody who's under the PPP regime, the public outcry doesn't mean anything. You see, in the Darmalal situation, all they did was have him resign willingly, have him voluntarily resign. The PPP never came out and say, well, he's going to be suspended, we're going to relieve him of his position. They didn't say any of those things, but they allowed him to come up and voluntarily, after the public's outcry, say, okay, he's going to be stepping out of office. So this is understandable that Bar Jagdeo is untouchable, and the people of Guyana have to recognize that he's above the law. He is the law. He controls the police force. He controls the DPP. Shalimar Hat dare not pick the phone up and call Bar Jagdeo and said, you're being investigated for X or Y offense or for allegations of fraud. So we understand the culture in Guyana. So we understand that the rule of law has no bearing in that country until something is done to change the system and to make folks understand, like what is happening here in America can happen there. I think at some point in our history, we're going to recognize that the law needs to be enforced equally, and that everyone needs to respect the law. Whether you be a VP or a president or whoever in Guyana, you need to respect the law. If you don't respect it, you will be prosecuted. You will be investigated and prosecuted, just like is happening here in the United States with former President Donald Trump. But people have got to recognize that Barjadio, he acts above the law. He controls the electoral system. He controls everything. He owns the police force. Guyana police force is not independent. We see the commissioner of police is still sitting there, even though he's past his time. He's past his prime. He should be out of office, but he's still sitting there. And there's no one can go tell the PPP that this guy needs to be replaced and they need to put a younger person who's more suitable and qualified for the position. They're going to leave people who serve their purpose. If you're not serving their purpose so that they can control you as a puppet, then you have no business in the police force. You have no business in the DPP. This is why Shalmarak has been there under their regime, sitting comfortable, controlling Guyanese people, making decisions for the people of Guyana. Her powers need to be curtailed. And the rule of law needs to be enforced equally across the board. Doesn't matter who you are. And we got to get to that point where we understand this as a people.
Well said, Miss Washington there. Let's head back to Attorney Chung. Here, a wanted bulletin was issued for a man shooting death out in Guyana. An altercation, a fight, a scuffle over a house issue. But this young man was out of the country at that time, but yet the police issued a wanted bulletin for him. They later, because he owned the vehicle, he owns the vehicle that allegedly drove away from the scene, and so they issued a wanted bulletin for him. They later found out that he was out of the country 2 months prior to the incident, and still is out of the country at the time he was interviewed by Gordon Mosley. The police is maintaining that they still want him to question him over the murder because of his vehicle. Your take, you're the criminal lawyer, Mr. Chung. Your take on this?
Well, this might bring us to recent charges of former president and of under the Racketeering Act, but which is an offshoot of the conspiracy statutes. And the conspiracy statutes permit a director of prosecution to charge someone who might not actually been at the scene of a crime, but might have participated or assisted in some kind of way. And there are two kinds of conspiracies. The racketeering charge is a new kind of conspiracy, relatively new. It was really instituted to deal mainly with drug cartels and the mafia and so on. But for incidental, ordinary people who may or may not even know that a crime had been committed, but if their tools, or something that a resource that they own was used in the commission, they could be implicated. No one is saying, of course, that he's going to go to jail or anything like that. And a wanted bulletin might be a little extreme, but they need to do their investigation. It's a little soon, I think, to make an allegation. But I would caution that conspiracy does allow a prosecutor to charge more than one person's involved for a crime where they may not have even been at the scene of the actual commission of the murder. A murder for hire, for example. I'm not saying that this gentleman is involved in a murder for hire. I'm just saying the investigation could lead to parties who were not present at the shooting.
Fair enough. They're just holding on to the fact that he owns the vehicle, and so they need him. He owns the vehicle. Not any sort of conspiracy or anything of that nature, but the fact that he owns the vehicle.
I think that's a little extreme and premature. They need to investigate before they accuse publicly.
I want to get to the issue of 72 hours, holding a suspect for 72 hours. And then when they're not satisfied that they've gotten sufficient information that they're looking for, they approach the court for another 72 hours. Ms. Washington, how unjust is that?
I think whenever somebody's liberty is at stake, the law should never allow for the police or the prosecutor to play while somebody's liberty is at stake, while they're being held, because 72 hours, there's a reason why the 72 hours rule should apply. First of all, the rule is there to secure a person's attendance to court if they're charged or if there's sufficient evidence to charge the person. So if the police looking at the file in the first 72 hours, there's a rule in the United States, the first 48, the rule it's really shorter than what we use in Guyana. If a crime is not solved within the first 48 hours, chances are it's going to become a cold case. And in Guyana, we have the 72 hours rule where the police is allowed to hold somebody while they investigate to figure out, or they try to figure out whether they can find sufficient evidence to lay a charge against that person and later put that person before the court. They're securing them so that they can actually take them to court if they decide to charge them, or if it's determined that there's sufficient evidence to charge that person. And I think it's a real unjust situation, because a lot of times innocent people end up, and this is Guyana, so the percentage of innocent people who end up being held within that 72 hours is very, very high. I think it's above 50%. A lot of times, if you have money, you have wealth, you have power, like in the Darmloud situation, you're not going to suffer that 42-hour rule. They're going to hold you for a short time, a few hours or something, and then they're going to allow you to post bail. When we know very well, station bail should only be issued in limited circumstances. But in a major case where allegations of rape was alleged, Damla was allowed to walk on station bail of $1 million. And I think a lot of times where a party is innocent, genuinely innocent, that is just an unjust situation to be in, where you're held in really bad conditions, because as we know, the prisons in Guyana, the police station, jail, it's real deplorable conditions you're being held under. And if you end up at Camp Street, it's even worse for an innocent man to be held for 72 hours, and then the DPP goes and asks for an additional 72 hours to hold you while they try to figure out whether they can solve a case, when in reality the case a lot of times is never solved. A lot of times the police trump up information or pad the file with false information because they just want to secure a person, to blame somebody, or to take matters into their own hand. Things are never properly investigated in Guyana. A lot of times it's based on one eyewitness in a dark alley where it's not properly lit. I've dealt with criminal cases in Guyana prior to coming to the United States, and I've seen a situation where people were charged in a situation where the alley was very, very dark. It wasn't properly lit. You took pictures and you couldn't even identify anything in those conditions. Yet the DPP laid charges against those defendants and decided to prosecute. I think the whole system it needs balancing, because a lot of times innocent people end up being held under really terrible conditions for no good or just reasons, while the DPP or the police try to figure out whether or not they can solve a case that has already gone cold, because a lot of times the first 48 hours gone. The window is already passed. So therefore, longer than 72 hours, the court should not allow. That should be denied by any court of law. They should say, no, if you can't solve this within this specific time, we're not going to continue to hold these defendants. But, we have a country where, might is right. And one party control all the power. All the power is in the DPP. And then it depends on who the magistrate is that she goes before to make the request for an additional 72 hours. The magistrates too are corrupt in Guyana. We have to be real. We have a corrupt system in Guyana, and there's no way to curtail that corruption until, I guess, if we have an impartial government who understands that you don't just appoint people based on their race. You don't just appoint somebody as a magistrate based on their political affiliation either, but you appoint them based on their competency. I see we have judges who are not even competent to be sitting there. I remember once a colleague of mine who doesn't even practice, but is in an administrative position in the Guyana High Court, speaking about being appointed a judge. And I'm thinking in my head, how dare she could even think about becoming a judge when you don't even have experience practicing the law. You don't even understand the procedure. How is it even possible for you to be appointed as a judge? But this is the realities of what we live under in Guyana. People are put in position that they're not even qualified for. So they mess up a lot of people's lives because of their incompetency, because of their lack of information or knowledge of how to do things. And I think this is the dilemma we face with holding somebody for more than 72 hours when they really should be released. Because a lot of times, let's be honest, the case has already gone cold. And this is a known thing to investigators in the United States. I don't know if they know this in Guyana, that after a certain period of time, your case is going to go cold. I don't think they understand this in Guyana.
Well said, Miss Washington. This reminds me of several cases that the police and the DPP recommended charges, murder charges. One such case comes to mind is the murder charge against Shaka Chase, who was charged with the murder of a policeman. Later found out that the charges were wrong. The DPP was forced, the same Shalimar Haq was forced to withdraw the charges against the individual after he was tortured by members of the Guyana police force. Some of them have been promoted, and it was proven that he was wrongfully charged. And there are so many other cases like Shaka Chase. Just imagine if there weren't folks protesting and exposing the corrupt justice system there in Guyana. Shaka Chase would have probably still been in jail. And I recall, not to get too personal, when that so-called treason charge was actually recommended by the then DPP, Hanuman Singh, Dennis Hanuman Singh. Dennis Hanuman Singh, who was then the DPP, he claimed later, years later, that he was actually forced to do what he did. And this is what was said. Hanuman Singh, the then DPP, said that he was forced to recommend treason charge against somebody, even though, and that's against me, even though he knew that there was no evidence. I don't know. Mr. Chung, attorney at law, you heard about the 72 hours, you heard about these wrongful charges and so forth. Your take, please, as we look at time.
Well, I heard Ms. Washington schooling you on the conditions of jails and prisons. I chuckled because you probably school us.
I chuckled too, but I said nothing.
But it strangely, most English-derived law, which Guyana is certainly partially of that, they do have the equivalent of a 72-hour period, including the British colonies in the U.S., which is America. But no one really follows that rule, and this has to do with the will. If you're arrested in Brooklyn, for example, more than likely within 24 hours you'll be before a judge. But they don't have to do that. They could keep you longer. But it's just the political will that rather than get into that gray area of it's 72 or 73 or 74, the policy is to get you out within 24 hours. And doesn't make justice better in the overall, but certainly for people who've been arrested with minimal evidence, they're charged and they get, the idea is not to wait uncharged for 72 hours, but to get you before a judge in 24 hours. And I suggest this in some of my writings that Guyana incorporate a 24-hour court system for the specific purpose of getting people out back to their families within, you don't have to, 72 hours is the rule, is the law. You don't have to push it to its extent. That's an indication that you're not operating efficiently. So rather than do that, increase the hours and have more judges and more cases being held on a 24-hour basis. It doesn't have to be all 7 days, but the idea is to get people out and back to their families.
Absolutely. Get people out and back to their families. Lots of folks who are sitting there in prisons, minor charges and so forth. It's just unjust. And you're correct, Mr. Chung. I've been through the system, whether in all of the lockups and even at Camp Street, so I understand the system. Speaking of the system, a young man died today at the New Amsterdam. I think his name is Singh, died under questionable circumstances at the New Amsterdam prison. We will touch on that sometime tomorrow. But before we go this evening, Miss Washington, here's this guy. This is a police guy who was over at SOCO, which is the Special Organized Crime unit that's been politicized under the PPP now. That gentleman there, or that guy there, who's now been promoted to commander, he was the one who manhandled and disrespected and insulted and violated the constitutional rights of Mr. Paul Slow, former Deputy Commissioner of Police, when he arrested him wrongfully in front of the courts. This is the same guy who denied an attorney the right to speak to her client and arrested or detained the attorney. He is now a commander of police in Georgetown. Ms. Washington, what's happening here before we get to Mr. Chung?
I remember that incident where that young attorney was arrested, and she was first denied the opportunity to speak with her client. Guyana is of such a nature that, like I said earlier, might is right. And even when we are staring in the face of instances of wrongful conduct, of unethical conduct, of conduct that has no place in our society, we condone it as a people and we promote those who engage in those wrongful conduct. And this is essentially what we're seeing here, that he's promoted for his wrongful conduct rather than being reprimanded and stripped of his position or removed from office, or even worse, forced into retirement or something. But as I said before, the system is what is oppressing the people of Guyana, and because they're awarding those who engage in wrongful, unethical conduct, and then they're punishing those who attempt to do what is right, what is morally just. Under the PPP, this is no surprise that he would be promoted versus demoted for his conduct in that situation. He handled that case very, very wrong. And the way he treated that attorney, I'm surprised that he still even has his job. But you know what? Under the PPP, you're protected. A fort, you have a strong fort around you because you're untouchable and you're above the law. The rule of law, I said before, and I will say it again, it has no consequence to you if you're protected under the PPP government. The government is not for all the people, number one, and they do not respect the law, but they expect the citizens to respect it. Because here you have people who are supposed to be enforcing the law, disrespecting the law, disobeying it, and engaging in conduct that we would frown at, or people supposed to frown at. An attorney at law is an officer of the court, and any attorney needs to be treated with a certain level of respect. And the way that attorney was treated, it was very disgraceful for a country. We ought to be ashamed that we have somebody who was, at the time he was in SOCO, and now he's promoted as the commander for East Coast, when really he shouldn't even be in his job at this time. But that's the nature of business in Guyana under the PPP regime: corruption, disrespect for the people of Guyana, and no regards for anybody who doesn't follow their politics, who don't play their politics. No regard for you. They don't concern themselves with you, but they promote their own who engage in unethical or unlawful conduct.
Well said, Miss Washington. As many of you would remember, Commander then, as he was in Region 10, Clifton Hicken, when 3 innocent Londoners were killed by members of the Guyana Police Force and dozens were injured. He later became the acting commissioner of police. His time as acting commissioner of police was recently extended to God in heaven knows when by Irfan Ali. You heard Mr. Chung, what Shellen mentioned there about this guy disrespecting and violating not only Paul Slow, former deputy commissioner of police, or assistant commissioner of police, and also disrespecting a lawyer. uh, preventing her from exercising her constitutional duties to represent her client. He is now a commander. Your take before we wrap up, sir.
Well, I agree that police seem to have special powers. This is a global problem, but in Guyana, it's particularly the case because they rarely any cases of them being prosecuted, even persecuted, for the things that they've done. I remember uh, Mr. Hicken and what happened at the bridge in Linden. I was a part of that protest that emerged in Georgetown outside the Parliament buildings. The women of Red Thread were instrumental in that, and we spent many nights out front trying to get some redress. And we managed to organize ourselves to be able to talk about it, to have public come by and share their views on it and other things that were happening at the time. I think it was around 2012. And little has changed. Mr. Hicken has been promoted as a consequence rather than punished for that behavior. I often said, and I took a picture, well, I used a picture that was taken of the police at the bridge in Linden. And my question that they were definitely not dressed to keep peace, because if you come in to keep peace, you don't come with heavy weaponry. And so they said then that they were told, I know I'm going a little beyond the question, that the IMF had given them some instructions that caused the cut in electricity, the rise in electricity billings and so on, that led to the protest. And so my question was, did the IMF tell you to shoot as well? Because it doesn't seem like they have personal judgment, and you lack personal judgment that comes from your family, your cultural upbringing. But when the powers who hire you themselves lack personal judgment, you get the freedom to do as you wish, to fire on armed civilians. And until now, there was a commission, and I think you could probably expound a little more on what happened as a consequence of that commission.
All right, well said. Nothing came out of that commission other than hundreds of millions of dollars spent, taxpayers' monies, to pay the friends and cronies of the PPPC. It's a farce of a commission, and they recommended that even the relatives of those who were murdered by the police to receive $1 million in terms of compensation, just a little over $1 million and so forth. As we wrap up, I'm not sure Mr. Chung and Miss Washington, but Mr. Chung, just so you know that if you ever want to go and retire in Guyana, you can choose one of these houses. The regime, they're handing out these houses to citizens. It costs, I think, $5 million, maybe somewhere thereabouts. Your take, oil-rich economy, billions of dollars. The first thing goes through your mind when you take a look at these houses, Mr. Chung.
Mark, that's going to be a whole show. I don't know where to begin, but I think that I've said in private to my colleagues that for Exxon to leave Guyana, we're going to have to pay them. And what I mean by that is that when we look at how much we're about to lose, not gain, it's easier to buy them now than to buy them later. And there's not enough time to really expound on the meaning of all that. But I would advise those in the know and those who are thinking about it to look at the film Smartest Men in the Room, which is about the Enron scam and what they did in India. And I think you will see how this actually works. Guyana has very little to get from this. And Mr. Lal, who has been on his TV show and in his newspaper, speaking about this, and he's been fairly down to earth and very clear what he's saying. And there are other people, Melinda Janke, the attorney, former BP attorney that works in Guyana, and others, good reporters who've been reporting on this matter. So I leave that to them. But maybe another time we can have her on, have Miss Yankee on, and really talk about the inner workings of large corporations like Exxon. That they're not there for the interest of Guyanese people.
Thank you so much, Attorney at Law Clermont M. Chung, with us this evening. His first time on with us here at 107.1 FM. And I know that all of you guys in the audience would agree that he should come again, and he will be invited again. Ms. Shellon Washington, the justice system in Guyana is in the ICU, the intensive care unit. People cannot depend on them for proper justice. Where do we go from here? Please, in your closing remarks.
I think in order to make the justice system in Guyana work, there needs to be some sort of reform, starting with the prosecution or the prosecutor's code, which give unfettered powers to the DPP. I think the DPP powers need to be curtailed. That code needs to be rewritten, and we need to have some way to balance our system, whether it be implementing a grand jury system or a system where we use a panel of people to listen to the evidence and then determine whether or not there should be a conviction. We need some sort of reform, because obviously the system that we have is not working. We give too much power to one person to decide the fate of all Guyanese people who are charged or who are being investigated for any criminal conduct. So I think that's a starting point for us to reform the prosecutorial system in Guyana by first starting with the prosecutor's code. I think that code is a dangerous thing to give to one person all the powers that Shalimar Act has over the people of Guyana. So we need to start there. And, again, guys, thank you all for staying with us tonight and sharing the link and being good supporters. I've read some of your comments. Thank you guys so much for the support. Thank you for being yourself. Thank you to so many of you. I can't mention all the names. From time to time, I try to mention names. I see my niece is there. I'm going to give her a shout out to Shaq Mears. I see you. I have so many. Sometimes I see so many of my clients up here. I'm not forgetting you, Ingrid Carter. I can't call everybody's name, so don't feel left out. At some other time, I will do that. And thank you guys so much, all of you, for all the referrals you've given me. I see Marcus putting up the information right there for all of you who have been referring me to your friends, your family, your neighbors. I was so grateful when my client, I saw her today, and she was like, she referred me to one of her family. So she got me from being on this show. So I'm so grateful for all of you. Thank you so much. I love you guys, and be safe. Have a good night. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Shellon Washington. Mr. Chung, of course, you will be back again, because we have a broken criminal justice system over here. There are lots and lots of young men, especially Caribbean young men as well, who are caught up in the system. Some of them have since been deported and all manner of things. I want us to touch on that on some other occasion. Please, you're not going to be a stranger right here on 107.1 FM. I have your number. Trust me, we will be calling you to appear again. But thank you so much, sir, for taking time out of your busy schedule. We leave you, though, for the last word about the justice system, what you know of the justice system in Guyana, whether there are any chances.
Well, I'm glad that I'm here. I appreciate you having me, Ms. Washington, inviting me. I wanted for some time, I don't always agree with everything you say, Mark, to the extent that I follow, but I've always held a healthy respect for you and what you went through, because I do believe that that what you did was important as a historical matter, let alone the legal ramifications and so on. I think that you really, it was a high price, but it was important as a lesson for what is required if you think that this is the kind of activism is your calling. And so, again, but at the same time, that was a lesson really in the system, the legal system in Guyana, what it can do, how it can be used politically to strip us if we express ourselves and our opinions that are contrary to what those in power might want or agree with, there's a high price to be paid. So it's political, and nothing happens outside the court without the stuff happening inside, and vice versa. You want to influence what happens in court, you make a lot of noise outside, because sometimes when you get in, it's a little too late. So we have to be able to see where the injustice is and to speak publicly and loudly as often as we can.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Attorney at law, Claremont M. Chung. I noticed somebody earlier asking, where is your office located, Mr. Chung?
They can reach me with Shalon. I'm semi-retired.
Okay. So in order to reach you, they got to go through Shalon.
Shalon is my advocate.
Thank you. And for Miss Shalon Washington, that's her information. If you want to get in touch with Mr. Clement Chung, he's the criminal lawyer. Miss Shalon Washington deals with medical malpractice, personal injuries, divorce, landlord and tenant, and so forth, all of those things. And you can call her 718-877-3100. Shalon Washington there for you guys. Thank you so much, ma'am. And Mr. Chung, thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Thank you. Yeah. And to all of our listeners, thank you too. We really look forward to having you guys here, for you guys making us a part of your evening as well, your evenings from Monday through Friday. We really do appreciate that. We will be back tomorrow, same place, same time, right here on 107.1 FM. For those of you who are celebrating your birth anniversary, happy birthday. Those of you who are probably in mourning for some relative or maybe a friend, our condolences to you. And to all of Guyana, I know Guyana is mourning because democracy is dead, absolutely dead in Guyana. And once again, to the relatives and friends of this Melissa Arokiam and her son, Mother Song found dead at Rose Hall with wounds. Our condolences to the entire family, the entire Rose Hall, and all of the people. All right. So again, thank you all for tuning in. We'll be back tomorrow. Same place, same time. Isabella and all others, new beings, Margaret, and you name it. I notice that Wayne Caesar was in the audience there. Good evening to you, sir. Ingrid Carter and all of you. Carl Miller. I wouldn't be able to call all of the names, but you know we guys appreciate you fully, 100%. Thank you all. So long.
So, this is attorney Shalon Washington, owner and founder of the Washington Law Firm, located at 455 Utica Avenue in Brooklyn, New York. We're specialized in medical malpractice, personal injuries, matrimonial law, and landlord and tenant. If you're in need of legal representation, please give us a call today. The number to call is 718-877-3100. Consultation is free at no cost to you. So call us today to see if we can be of any assistance to your legal needs. Again, the phone number to call us is 718-877-3100.
Yeah, my name is Jacinty Caldata Francis C. Vietnam, and since 1965 I become a voter, and I always place my X next to the cup. And what they are doing today, I can't take it. So I have no more vote to give to PPP anymore. I'm not going to vote anymore no more. If they have to lose by one vote, they're losing it by data.
With another one, straight up, blackness I am. Aye. Who tell the truth? Mark Benstock, defend the ghetto youth. Mark Benstock, registration is the truth. Mark Benstock, straight up from the root. Mark Benstock, who tell the truth? Mark Benstock, defend the ghetto youth. Mark Benstock, registration is the truth. Mark Benstock, straight up from the root. Mark Benstock, I do it for the love, him not do it for no money. Straight up, him attack, educating everybody. Big up my friends and big up my family. Turn on the radio, catch the vibes, it's integrity. Straight up, Benstock stands for unity. One people, one nation, one destiny. Free up the truth in the air, even the blind can see. The deaf can need it, don't contact, the crib can walk. Who tell the truth? Mark Benstock, defend the ghetto youth. Mark Benstock, registration is the truth. Mark Benstock, straight up from the root.